All right. Well, thank you so much for joining us today for this roundtable. Our guest today is Brian Dickens, who is the Chief Human Resources Officer for the University of Tennessee System, where he's responsible for planning, developing, and implementing statewide initiatives that support employee engagement. He previously served at Ithica College, where he oversaw the upgrading of the school's HR systems to a cloud-based management system. He also served at Texas Southern University, where he developed long-term programs to support leadership development and staff engagement. Brian is also a certified executive coach and consultant, providing management and staff development services with his company, BD Consulting. Thank you so much, Brian, for joining us.
Thank you, Kayleen, for having me. I'm excited to be here today.
Well, let's get started with the questions. So, how can HR leaders show the business value of initiatives like employee development and employee engagement?
This is such a good question, particularly because, as you think about the landscape in terms of the workplace, it's so changed given what we see now in terms of this new pandemic environment with people in remote work statuses and really doing work from a distanced capacity in some way, which really creates in and of itself challenges for organizations, companies, institutions, campuses to be engaged with their workforce. And I was just finishing up a board meeting this week where part of the conversation was giving a workforce update in terms of how are people doing. And the board chair of the University of Tennessee System asked, he said, Brian, just tell me in gist, how are the people doing? How are they doing? And so that in and of itself really sort of paves the way for being able to have conversations around engagement, conversations around how are we connected with our employees in a meaningful way. And as you all know, the studies show that employees that are engaged are 3 times as likely to stay with the company. So the more they feel like they're connected, that in and of itself is a value proposition that really paints a business case for why we would continue to invest in this space. I also think that to foster a culture of engagement is really the call of duty for anyone doing this work in human resources or organizational development in any way, given the idea that you are really thinking about how do your employees feel about your thinking of them, how do you value your employees, and you don't know that without having some level of an employee development and or an employee engagement program to measure that. And so those touch points with employees are critically important and essential, I think, to creating and maintaining an engaged workforce. I also think that HR should be in collaboration leading the design, the measurement, and the evaluation of proactive engagement workplace policies and practices that really sort of drive and reinforce and almost incentivize in some ways managers, supervisors, and leaders to really be in touch with their employees on the daily, weekly, monthly basis as necessary, just to get a real good gauge again in terms of where are we. We think about, I heard an analogy this week that's also really catching for me. And so if you think about an annual engagement survey, that's a snapshot once a year, right? I would liken that to an annual physical fitness visit to your doctor, right? But along the way, throughout the rest of the year, what are you doing to touch base, right? And so I think of the pulse surveys, the regular check-ins as blood pressure monitoring, as checking your sugar levels on the regular basis, so that you really do stay in tune with the health and wellness of your organization over that year span between those touch points that are more annualized. So I really do think that analogy alone helped me really think and share with leaders at our institution of the importance of understanding the health of the organization. Also think it helps organizations to be engaged in developing employees and helping them make sound judgments about ways forward, about any business decisions that need to be made. You don't do that effectively without having strategic implications of what those practices and some of the critical thinking and merit behind significant investments and engagement programs and enhancing those programs. I think also it's developing what I would call a compelling business case by weaving all of those things together. And if you were ever asked as a leader in this space, how is the organization doing? How are our people doing? How do you know that without measuring it? How do you know that without these touch points? And so I think that alone helps to also build. I also think that we can sometimes be exposed to unintended consequences failing to do that, failing to have those touch points. You might see a rise in turnover. You might see a rise in disengagement, where you have actually employees who don't feel that you have their best interest at heart, become less and less engaged to the point of disengagement or passive engagement. Either one of those don't serve an organization well. So the unintended consequences is, how is that impacting your brand? How is that affecting you from a day-to-day workplace perspective? So I also think that's a huge place to make the business case for basing investments in data-driven decisions that are only gathered by engagement opportunities and development opportunities. And so that will create the sound data that you can pull from and make those informed decisions. Lastly, I think it's about creating, again, if you can use that analogy of the health perspective, an engagement culture that really speaks to, I want to know how you're doing from the larger perspective, but I also want to do some check-ins just to see how you're doing. And I think that culture creation for engagement and development of employees will go extremely far for organizations in the long term.
Excellent points, Brian, that you bring. I believe it's more like a checklist.
Yeah.
Organization needs to be doing.
Yeah.
To truly develop their employees and to drive engagement.
Yeah.
I like your analogy of annual physical is fine, but along the way you need to know how's your blood pressure doing.
Right. I mean, in between there, you may not see me next year if I don't do well, right? So
exactly.
So a good analogy. Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And you know how we have driven check-in. We kind of blazed that trail at Bullseye, and I was talking with one of our customers in Arizona, and they provide food to high schools. They serve hot food. And she said during the COVID period of 7 months, check-ins have been a game changer to stay connected with our people, to make sure that we stay connected and we know if everyone is doing all right.
Sure.
It's more of not just business, but maintaining a positive attitude and stay connected and say, hey, are you okay there?
Yeah.
People get very, very frustrated and depressed working out of their homes and not having that interaction with their peers.
Yeah, I think you've hit on a really important topic, Adil. Not only is it the physical health check, but it's the wellness, right, as well, in terms of how are people doing emotionally and socially during this time. It's a tough period. Even doing self-checks, Adil, I find, are very helpful for us as leaders in this space in terms of how can we, as leaders, not put on our face mask first, right? In order to help others. So we've got to also do that daily check to see, am I okay in this space as well? I think that's also a very critical piece. Leaders are often the forgotten population because our responsibility is the caretaker in many ways, right, in terms of maintaining our population. So valid point. I think you've really nailed it with making sure we also attend to the wellness and well-being of our employees during this time.
Kevin Martin, one of your peers, he's out there doing roundtables just on employee wellness.
Yeah.
That's the subject he's covering, and I like, again, you have such good analogies. It reminds me of an announcement we have all heard when we get on board a plane.
That's right. Put it on first, right?
Put your, and hopefully you'll be able to help your kids.
Yeah.
So anyways, Kayleen, all yours.
All right. Well, along the same lines, well, you touched on it just a little bit here, but what are some best practices of organizational facilitators in delivering an exceptional employee experience?
So, this is a really interesting question. Best practices of organizational facilitators in delivering, so I'm struck by the question, that's first, because I think it really has so many different layers. And so when I think about delivering an exceptional employee experience, I think it really starts at the beginning of an employee's life cycle at an organization, right? So what's the very first impression that we give employees when we begin dialoguing, even during the recruitment process, of what does it mean to join this organization or the University of Tennessee in my case? What does it mean, and what kind of message do we set up front? And so I think there's an opportunity for facilitators of delivering this exceptional experience and doing things that help enrich people's jobs, right? Incorporating not only the how of doing the work, but maybe helping them understand the why of doing the work. I borrow from Simon Sinek, begin with why. I mean, that's a huge opportunity. So I think that's one of the best practices, is beginning with why of the work that we're doing. That really helps to gain also, I think, respect for the work you're doing directly, maybe even the work that your coworkers may be doing, because, explaining the bigger picture helps them understand even beyond their own contribution or individual contribution to the workplace. And so I think that's helpful. We touched on the idea of recruitment. And what I mean by that is I think you have to do a really good job of targeting applicants who really can resonate well with the why, because they will automatically become your internal and external ambassadors, brand ambassadors, and ambassadors for goodwill and connectivity throughout the workplace. So I think that's really important. And I think one of the other best practices is to truly quickly identify some of those players who are on your team that need to truly opt out, that don't really push that envelope around engagement and creating an exceptional employee experience. I'd like to think that good organizations are led and created and are in their existence because they're made up of good people. And what that means is that your organization is driven by the energy that comes through that organization. When you think about bad apples, when you think about people who are not about brand building and have more concern about what's in it for me than what is it that I can contribute to the organization, I think one of the best practices is to also weed out that element from your workplace, or rehabilitate that energy in your workplace where possible. And again, starting with why is one possible way of doing that. Which leads me to my whole thought around, I think, training and development as well in this space. I think we sometimes assume that when we bring people on board, they automatically kind of know what to do in this space. And I think without offering real tools, skill sets, and maybe even important brand values that help that employee to connect more intentionally with the work they're doing, I think can really help. So again, training and development of your workforce, or the people who are the good people that make up your good organization, right? And so I think that's what I'd offer in that space. I just think that's a loaded question. So thanks for asking it. Yeah. My last thoughts in the same space is I don't think you can also do a good job of cultivating good folk for an organization without considering strategically how well are you doing with compensation. What are those things that are market driven that help to reinforce good employee behavior, right? How they don't feel taken advantage of or not adequately compensated could sort of drive what we would also describe as motivators that aren't motivational, right? So I think that's one thing to consider. And again, the performance management is a best practice. I think, again, being very clear about reiterating good behaviors that you expect to see out of employees, and managing expectations of behaviors that maybe not be in alignment. And the other thing that's just really a good practice is, I think, communication. The more we can do that, both formally and informally, subtle hints that really speak to, here's the expectation of what you should be experiencing in an exceptional employment environment. And so we want to enhance that. And I think sharing that broadly, reiterating that broadly, also gives employees empowerment to hold you accountable in a way when they see maybe you're not in alignment, or your organization may in some moments experience cognitive dissonance, right? Where their actions aren't aligned with what we print and state as our values. So I think that's an important element as well. And I'll stop there. I just think it's a good space.
Brian, I think, very comprehensive answer, and how you have started. We have asked this question to several of our board members, and but you bring in the aspect of recruiting the right people to the organization, and that really hits home. The more I thought about that as you were, going through your answer, that makes a big difference. I have personally made a couple of mistakes where I was not able to read that the people I was hiring were, they were just there to stop gap in a springboard, and they were looking for something else while they keep the checks coming.
Absolutely. Yeah.
So and it's a very interesting and I think to the point that you need to do a good job of onboarding and bringing the right folks who fit with your culture, with your vision alignment, and they are your ambassadors for future. And then you can cultivate that talent, and chance is that they're going to stay with you. You'll be able to retain them because their heart was in it.
Absolutely.
So that was a very interesting take. where you started. Loved it.
Yeah, I love that. Thank you, Adil. Thank you.
Well, if I can insert an unscripted question here based on what we just discussed, what comes to mind for me is the fact that right now, I don't think there are many organizations who are actively recruiting as much as they were because of the economic conditions right now. And so a lot of these organizations, maybe they have some of those bad apples, or maybe they just have a lot of employees who are more passively engaged. What can these leaders do to re-engage or develop their employees that they already have?
So, as we were talking earlier, Adil, and as you were commenting on the response, another thing came to mind, and Kayleen, I think this speaks to your question. There's another analogy that I think really works extremely well in this space, and there's this in alignment with the strengths finder sort of mindset, where we really focus on people's strengths in organization. I believe there was a YouTube entitled "Who's Sinking Your Boat?" Have you all seen that one before? And it shows if you can imagine your workforce being on a rowing team, those fast boats where everybody's rowing together, right? Imagine looking at engagement from that perspective, where you've got people in the front of the boat who are just rowing extremely hard, pushing every day when they come in to take the organization where strategically you as an organizational leader want it to go. And if you can imagine in that same subgroup of work, in a workforce in that boat, that middle group are people who are passively engaged, just checking out the scenery, while the people up front are rowing like the Dickens, no pun intended, to get through, to really advance the agenda. Now then, on the back of that boat, you're really disengaged employees who are actively putting water into the boat. I think from your perspective, managers have always got to keep in mind, where are my people along this continuum? And when is it time for me to cut the cord? Or when is it time for me to reinvest in those people who are passive, who can be again rehabilitated to come back on board? And so I think the reality of this day and time is that our recruitment needs, particularly at the University of Tennessee, while we've slowed down for a moment, our needs actually have increased to have more people providing services, even in the remote environment. So we've used this Zoom vehicle to help us do more recruiting and more engagement of getting a feel for what person can complement our current culture, right? In a way that's healthy. Notice I don't use the word fit. It's about complementing, because sometimes cultures need to shift as well. But the point is, to your question, as recruiters, as managers, as leaders who are having to manage this workforce that's really volatile right now, and with the wellness, depression, all those other things we talked about, there could be some underlying causes for why a person is actively putting water in the boat and just passively riding. So I think it's, again, those checkpoints, those opportunities of just doing those more than annual physical checkups that gives you an opportunity of, again, when people know that you see them and that you care about them, they're more apt to give you their discretionary effort, that effort which you don't pay for. Does that make sense? Is that helpful?
Yes.
Okay. Very much so. Very much so. It was a very good question, Kayleen, that you asked.
Yeah.
So in good old TQM days, I'm going a couple of decades.
Yeah.
Looking that back.
You're dating yourself here, Adil.
I was on this Automotive Engineering Society's circle where we would give seminars and get engaged, with the society's conferences and breakout sessions. And I still remember using just adding to your analogy, adding to your answer there. And I used quite a bit. We used to have flip charts. I'm predating it to, we didn't have 10D 1000 era,
Right.
So uh, I would draw a big arrow. I said, here's a vision. You know, if organization is heading right, and then you draw a bunch of small arrows. And those small arrows better be going in the same direction.
Right.
Because if you have resistance within the organization going in the other direction,
that's exactly it. Yeah.
It doesn't matter how hard the front guy is rowing.
Boat's going nowhere. Right. Exactly.
Boat is not going anywhere.
Yeah. I love it.
Great points. You just gave me a flashback. Kelly, back on track with you.
Okay. All right. So during this time of intense cost cutting, what can organizational leaders do to continue funding their engagement initiatives?
You know, I think our previous questions have really fed into this very nicely. I think during these times where budgets are tight and cost-cutting measures are in place across many organizations, I wonder if we, in the space of organizational development, again in HR, are really purporting the value proposition of what drives our talent and those outcomes of the existing people that you have, right? And so as you think about where to cut cost, I would rather cut cost in terms of how many pens, how many reams of paper are we buying, how many are we efficient in our spend in terms of electricity. You know, I think there's an opportunity for us to do other cost cutting that doesn't impact the human element of an organization first. Sometimes organizations have to go to that next measure, and that's clear. But I think it is really important that when you begin to cut initiatives, people typically run to, well, let's go to the workforce first. Let's cut off. If we stop paying people, we can do a better. We can stop the bleeding. I think that's sometimes the wrong move. I think it's about looking at other opportunities to truly think about what investments are we making, and then which ones of those are critical to, again, the health and well-being of our workforce. Again, the people make up a good organization. So when you start cutting people, you run the risk of also cutting nose off, spite the face, right? I mean, that's another. I'm full of these witticisms, Adil, so just know that I'll keep these coming through the conversation. But I think it's important that as you think about any de-investments that could, again, impact the best practices we just talked about in terms of creating that exceptional employee experience, you run the risk of really upsetting your organizational culture in a way that may not be recoverable. So I think that's important to think about. I also saw some recent information from Gartner that sometimes understanding the impact of engagement and or productivity can help organizations avoid, rash decisions around what items are most dispensable and which ones to be cut first. And so again, without having those return on the investments in terms of what we've put our monies into for engagement and development, they can sometimes be a very easy low-hanging fruit to a CFO or someone who's not engaged on that side, who's looking at just how can we save money without truly understanding the return on the investment in that money. I also think that HR can help really prioritize what are the right things that we can do in terms of saving money in the long run. So things like cutting maybe the cost that we spend in recruitment, how we do that, really reimagining some internal processes and services that we provide that can help us really rethink the priorities, right? Making strategic decisions around those kind of investments. So I think that's, again, an opportunity sometimes it's also good in these cost-cutting places to make long-term investments into things that we know will pay dividends beyond the current environment. And sometimes that's a hard thing to do when you say, well, I don't have money right now to do earmark for that. Sometimes it's a strategic decision to go a different direction in that space. And so I think that's, again, an understanding. So I would say really having a greater, deeper dive and understanding of, if we're going to cut, let's make sure it doesn't impact our people in a negative way.
That is a very good lead into the next question, actually. So as leaders are faced with making these tough decisions, how important is it that they have access to real-time data?
Oh, I mean, you've just made the business case right again. So I think you're right. Real-time data is where it is. I mean, I reported again during our board meeting this week on our workforce update in terms of here's what we look like. Here's where we are as an organization. If I didn't have access to real-time data, I could only give them information that was at a certain particular point in time. But having real-time data that's relevant, that is even responsive to the current environment, really helps you make those critical decisions. And so I think it also is an opportunity to use that data and add value to conversations around anything that's a business model that's up for discussion or conversation. When you think about business decisions along the way, without having informed or decisions made by informed data, right, or data that informs good decisions, you run the risk of making a wrong turn or doing something that doesn't help. I think when you utilize surveys or other things that are those checkpoints, it's an opportunity for people to understand how people are feeling again, connect that to decisions that are being made, and feel good about some of the tough decisions that you may have to make as a leader. Again, being able to, because you understand the full broader picture, sharing the why of why you're going to have to make some of those decisions that may not be as easy. So those tough decisions during a pandemic, or I call a VUCA environment, right? Volatile, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous. It's a reality of what we're all dealing with right now. And I don't know about you, Adil, but I wasn't able to walk to the shelf and pull out a playbook to deal with this pandemic and all the issues that have come with it. We were charged to be leaders who thought and are thinking out of the box to address these new
normals.
The new normals, but also the new unexplored challenges of what this environment has brought. I mean, let's take higher ed, for example. Higher ed was the last to say, hey, we can all go virtual. You had instructors, you had teachers who says, oh no, I can't, I'm not teaching my class remotely. Who does that, right? It diminishes the academic quality. I don't think that the reality of the new normal that has forced us to advance even our own thinking about capabilities or possibilities. This COVID was I would almost, and I hate to say it this way, but that's ultimately what I think it feels like. I think it was a blessing in disguise to help catapult organizations who were stuck in old business models that weren't agile, adaptable, so on and so forth. So I think there were some positive outcomes. Don't like the way we got to them, but some positive outcomes from this environment. So I think that's that the whole idea of innovation, creativity, I think are other ways that organizations could use data to inform those decisions. So, I just also think knowing that the real-time data has got to be clean. So dirty data in is dirty data out, right? And so you've got to make sure that what you put into your system is clean enough and reliable and valid that when you do present real-time data, that you're operating in your best intention and way forward. And so I think that's important. I also just think it's valuable to use real-time data in all things in the life cycle of an organization, from recruitment, retention, appraisals, performance management, thinking about learning and development investments again, and just the whole gamut. So I just think that that's a good place to be and maybe not a bad opportunity for leaders to think about as they have to navigate tough decisions. Yeah.
Great. I think points here again, Brian. And we have to reimagine a lot of things. I know people firsthand who believe that there's so much value for team members being in the office, 9 to 5, and that face value and face time. I have seen those people turn around now, because I've been a early adapter of flex time and time. Take care of business will take care of customers, and customers will take care of our financial needs.
Right.
But then there are those hardliners saying, this employee, she left 15 minutes early and that guy came 15 minutes late. They have turned around and say, wow, remote teams are doing such a great job. And we have not seen our own team. I've actually hired a person that I have not met face to face.
Yeah.
New norms. You have to reimagine. You have to constantly be changing and be ready to adapt to the new normal. And but let me take you to the last board meeting, just for a second here, where we shared with you, and since Kayleen asked this question about, real-time data, we took and we presented to our board, and I'm happy to report to one of the board members that, stickiness is good, and we're getting out of the gate because leadership is recognizing that we have given something to the organizations in a leadership business intelligence dashboard, where we took 50 some KPIs from SHRM and 15 some from ISO and said, here, take the KPIs that relate to you and we'll turn them on real time through APIs. That is doing awesome. So the real-time data is your best tool to walk in the boardroom and be able to make your case to what needs to be cut, and how you can save your human capital that we always claim are the biggest assets. So
I love it. Think about the work you're doing, though, Adil, in a real-time way, right? I mean, the delivery of that kind of dashboard capability for leaders empowers them and gives them ownership of their decisions in a real way. I mean, it's not guesswork. It's an informed decision, right? Because you're empowering them with real-time data. You've made the business case for your own question. I just think it's a wonderful delivery. So thank you for that. Thank
you for actually pushing me in that arena. I'm talking to the person who picked a few papers from his desk and say, hey, what about this?
You're taking me back, Dill. I'm remembering too much now.
So Kelly, you're talking to the person who actually started Bullseye Engagement in the business intelligence dashboard business. I think you have one more question, right?
I do. I have one last question to close things out. So what is the biggest challenge that you face as a human capital leader in higher education? And maybe in addition to that, is there anything that you want to leave with our audience, anything that you've noticed recently that stands out to you, or any like possible solution to the challenges you're facing?
You know, as I think about it, human capital leaders, what's been on the forefront of our conversations recently, or in these last 8 to 9 months, I think there's no way one can avoid, number one, COVID. COVID is a huge issue that we are managing, but I'd also just reiterate that I think one of the other pieces that we're really struggling with is the notion of diversity and inclusion, particularly in this volatile time in our nation where we're, again, so polarized that, you know, I literally see us going backward historically as a nation. And that's playing out through our workforces in many ways. As you see populations moving to their respective poles, that's also playing out in terms of the workplace. I think there's no way to escape the realities of our VUCA environment again. I think that's a really important term that I would say. You know, I think engagement through that whole process is probably the biggest element. And it's going right back to our original conversation, right? The biggest place right now is for us to be connected, to us to be a vehicle or conduit by which meaningful exchange and dialogue can happen in an organization that helps heal the land, so to speak, but also helps to allow voices that were sometimes not heard to be heard. And I think that's an undercurrent as we also deal with the isolation issues that we've been talking about today in terms of what our remote workforce is feeling like, how are we doing that. I think the reality as well is understanding that the brick and mortar of our current organizational structures will change. And if you really want to think about cost saving measures, think about the amount of money we spend on the infrastructure, right? The physical location of where we work. Realizing, to your point, Adil, earlier, our workforce is more productive in the office or away. I find for myself that I give more time, more of my discretionary time working from a home office because I'm not ever disconnected. Now that's a balancing act as well in terms of how do we create this notion of work-life balance being a value for the company as well, where we need to maintain and protect some of that. But I really do believe that the budget implications that are also driving those initiatives that feed the other two items we talked about in terms of, you know, COVID-related issues, managing a remote workforce, and race relations, social injustice, all of those things are at play, making for a really interesting time in this space. So, you know, what I'd leave for you is that I think, again, the worst of times bring about the best of organizations, meaning we all lean forward or lean inward toward each other to create not the old way or to run back to the old way, but to create a new way that would suggest going this way, we can be a whole lot better. So I think there's the opportunity, there's the glimpse of hope for the future of where we are despite the current challenges. And I think human capital leaders, particularly in higher education, have to model the way so that those students that we are responsible for, bringing into the organization one way and them leaving out another, that is our paramount responsibility when we come to work every day. What's the outcome for the student? And so from a higher ed perspective, I just think there's so many opportunities for us to do it better, be responsive, and hear the voices of not only the workforce, but even our student populations who are also dealing with the same challenges our employees are. Isolation. Where's my social interaction as a college student these days, right? That's a balancing act for students who are either on campus or working remotely from home themselves. So this is an opportunity for us to lean in, listen to the voices of our people, and not just listen, but respond and react in ways that are helpful. That's what human capital leaders should be doing in this space.
Excellent points again, Brian. And it reminds me of an Indian poet who, and the analogy is, it's one of the hardest thing to ever translate poetry into a different language.
Yes.
So then it's not poetry anymore.
Right.
But he's talking to the eagle, and he says he's talking to an eagle and saying, "Look, don't worry about winds blowing against your path. They will just help you take to even higher heights." So sometimes the new challenges will actually force those people who have the talent, and it's just, they create new paths, they create new ways to cope with the challenges, and all of a sudden you find yourself living in the new norms. And commercial real estate need to reimagine what they're going to do with it, because many organizations, Fortune 500, Fortune 100 organizations who are startups and early stage companies, have already reimagined. They need to go back and have the same amount of a space. I'm telling you, my team is outstanding working from home, and we are doing all that. Airline industry have to reimagine.
That's right.
Virtual conferences. So all those conference centers, and you're one of the keynote speakers and attend. So things will change quite a bit.
Yeah.
So when winds blow, I think there was a song Against the Wind as well, famous.
Mm-hmm.
So it helps you kind of try your strength to go against the wind a little bit and see what your yield point is.
That's right. Yeah, absolutely.
How much can you take? So it really gives you, you find out what you're made of.
That's
absolutely.
Right.
Absolutely.
That lifeboat against the current. I love it. I love it. Yeah.
But thank you so much, Kayleen. Back to you.
Those are all of my questions. Thank you so much. This was a really great discussion. I enjoyed it.
Oh, thank you so much, Kayleen. And Adil, you know how much I appreciate these opportunities. Always glad to contribute.